I am stranded on a floating island with nothing more than a single tree and the void below. And the only way to escape is to make the Stargate, but it won't be easy. Gregtech, Create, realistic chemistry, dangerous machineries, and endless crafting trees stand between me and freedom. We'll need to spend hundreds of hours in Minecraft's most addicting modpack in order to beat it, and the entire time we'll be hoarding strange ingots and chemicals, so we're gonna need a storage solution that can handle it. Today, we're rushing through the entire early game to unlock the power of applied energistics. Now, normally in Minecraft, you just go mining for 10 minutes and then you've got gold. But here we've got nothing but a tree and some grass. So how in the world do we go from this to this? Well, chopping trees is still the start, and expanding the island so we'd have room to catch more saplings and build machines. Immediately though, our start's different to the old version of the pack because we no longer have to sieve dirt for stone. Instead, we can just explode it out of the grass in infinite quantities. The true clicker game experience. So here we are, the typical one tree skyblock start. Crooking leaves for worms, using worms for string, using string for a bed, and making our first sieves. Our first sieving target is gravel, which we can actually make by destroying cobblestone with cobblestone. We make a cobblestone hammer and can use that to crush cobblestone into gravel, and running gravel through a sieve unlocks the first ores of the game, most importantly, iron. With iron unlocked, we actually have access to the Create mod, meaning we can start pulling off some useful automation. Most importantly, cobblestone. But cobblegens need lava, which actually first needs water, and that we can get from extracting the juices out of leftover saplings inside of an oak crucible. But that takes a while, so in the meantime, I clicked in some more cobblestone and andesite, but hammered the cobblestone all the way down into dust, which left just enough time for the water to ooze out of the baby trees. And in my overexcitement, instead of making an infinite source of water, I used one of the sources to convert a single dust into a single clay block, and then I had to wait all over again for another source block in order to actually get the infinite water. You might wonder to yourself why we need clay for lava, and don't worry, it'll make sense soon, but first, we really need bone meal, which we can only get from composting saplings. Did I mention I was playing in peaceful mode? Also, it turns out you need a ton of saplings for just one single bone meal, and we need 7. So it was off to the tree chopping land for a while again, and after 2 stacks of saplings, give or take, we had 7 bone meal and 7 clay balls, which we could combine to create porcelain clay. The porcelain clay can make a crucible that gets hot enough to melt cobblestone into lava. After a while, of course, which gave us plenty more time to move on with Plan Infinite Cobblestone. A regular cobblegen is slow and boring, so instead what I'll do is use a Gregtech hammer to mash 2 copper ingots into 1 copper plate, which is a terrible ratio, but it's what we've got, and use those plates to make a Create mod pipe network hooked up to a stone barrel. We now have to move our lava, and the only safe way to do that is with an iron bucket, which we'll need more plates for. And thankfully here I remembered that the Create press lets you make 1-to-1 sheets for a few early game metals, including copper and iron, so I made sure to set one up. With cheaper sheets, we could easily make an iron bucket, because of course you need sheets for that, and safely transport our fresh lava to the stone barrel, and make chutes to automatically pull cobblestone out of them into a storage drawer for automatic infinite cobblestone. Letting that build up, I did some storage sorting, and even set up a Create super smelter, so that we wouldn't have to wait for things to smelt in a furnace or use any fuel. I also let the worms loose again, so that we can make 20 more sieve meshes in order to sieve 25 blocks at once, which I used on sand to get gems and sea life, and dust to get weirder gems, redstone, glowstone, and sulfur, all of which we need today. We're closer to gold than ever before, but gold needs steel, and so first we have to make a primitive blast furnace, which means we need a massive amount of clay. And our only way of producing it is to right-click a barrel filled with water while holding dust. Not wanting to do that 1 bucket at a time, I used fluid pipes to connect a bunch of barrels to a cobblestone generator, so we didn't have to do this manually, but this probably took a lot longer than it needed to, since I could have just made a separate pump for this, and it would have gone way faster. But if you think I learned from my mistakes, no, because I end up just adding more barrels to this thing when I felt it was slow, and after way too long, we did have a ton of stacks of fire clay dust, but before we could make the PBF, we need Gregtech tools to make screws and rods and rings and other weird microcrafting parts, so I braced myself for the microcrafting grind. Using the new tools, we could shape the dust into raw bricks, get those smelted, and turn them into fire brick blocks. Now we just needed some wrought iron, which is like iron, but better, and surprisingly easy to get, if not a bit annoying. You just have to sizzle iron ingots on a campfire, and they'll pop right off as wrought iron. More like campfire iron, if you know what I'm saying. With a bunch more microcrafting, we finally have the PBF controller, and all the fire bricks we're gonna need to make our first multi-block. The primitive blast furnace combines 1 wrought iron and 2 charcoal over an agonizing 40 seconds to create 1 ingot of steel. And we're gonna need hundreds, if not thousands of these ingots today, so it's really important I stock this thing up to keep it producing. Now you might be thinking, hey wait, why does steel turn into gold in this pack? And it doesn't. Steel makes a machine that makes gold, which should mean that we're finally able to make the machine that makes the gold. No, foolish child. We're trying to make a kinetic ore factory, which is a multi-block that requires input and output ports, and those require LV machine holes, and those require rubber-coated wires, and those require a machine that takes glass! And for some reason, the developers of this pack made glass Gregified. Grind sand into quartz dust and then mine gravel for flint and grind that into flint dust, separating the flint dust into tiny piles of flint dust, combine the quartz dust and the tiny flint dust to make glass dust. Don't put that into a furnace, instead put it on a campfire, and that is the completely sane and logical way to make 1 single block of glass. But now that we have the glass for an arboreal extractor, the only tree it works on is jungle, for some reason. I don't know. Which means it's finally time to sieve up some dirt, which explodes into insane amounts of organic material, like crops and seeds, but importantly, saplings, including jungle. The last things we needed were some micro-crafted Gregtech parts and a few thermal series bits, and just like that, we've gone from chopping trees to draining them. Of course, one of these is really slow, so I tediously made all the parts to make 7 more of them, connected them all to the jungle tree, and hooked them all together with pipes so I wouldn't have to wait until all of them filled up before I could take out a bucket and make rubber out of it. But finally, we had the last components for the LV machine holes we'd need, as rubber is easy to make from latex, and after a ton of steel smelting and wire crafting and microplating, we had synthesized our first LV machine holes, which we could turn into a kinetic input port and an item output port. All the other inputs and outputs we'd need could actually be kept at ULV, so they're pretty simple. So with just a bit more Gregtech crafting shenanigans, we had all the blocks and ports we needed to run this beast of a machine. And after hooking up a ton of water wheels, we had all the stress units, RPMs, and water throughput we needed to run this giant brick eyesore. Not only does it have a chance to double any crushed ores we put into it, but finally it unlocks for us gold. And that means our first steam engines. These beasts require loads of heaters and tanks, and I plan to fuel them with charcoal from a tree farm. Originally, I wanted to superheat the burners by blowing fans into them to make the steam engine level 18, but that consumed fuel so quick I couldn't produce it fast enough. So after way too long of trying and failing to make it work, I ended up making 2 level 9 steam engines because it makes the same effect. We have nearly 300,000 stress units to work with, basically for free at this point. It's time to finally dive into early cobblestone processing. I make 21 mechanical crafters, which unlock the recipe for Create's crushing wheels, and using 3 pairs of them, I can make a cobblestone into gravel and cobblestone into sand crushing tower. For now, I'll input the cobblestone manually, but in the future, it'll be so easy to make things automatic. And you know what else can be easy? Video games with the help of my sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University. Yeah, that's right, a fully accredited online college that offers a video game design degree. In it, you'll be learning from industry experts to build skills and connections that can help you make your dream games into a reality and potentially even a career. I love programming and game design, and it's helped me make things today like my Brain Cells SMP pack, and I wanted to be able to bring some of the joy of game design to you guys. You'll even be learning 4 different programming languages, and one of them is Java, the language that Minecraft itself is written in. But don't think this is just a stuffy programming class. No, you'll be learning all sorts of topics about game design, like how to bring environments and characters to life and how to create dynamic and interesting challenges for your players. And the support does not end at graduation, as SNHU will be there to assist you in your postgraduate job hunt. So if you're interested in additional information about SNHU's game design online degree, go to the link in the description or pinned comment, snhu.edu/djo, and fill out the form. It'll even support the channel. And thank you to SNHU for sponsoring this video. Back to the madness. Now that pretty much all the ores and gems within our grasp is easily accessible to us, it's time we push for the next tier of materials, from the flint meshes. But that's going to require us to power through. Getting into Gregtech, however, asks us to do a lot of part crafting, and having our storage all over the place is going to make that really hard. To fix that, I can make an early game storage solution using colossal chests and Tom Simple storage. It's really easy to create a colossal chest. It just costs a ton of wood, and I can slap a Tom Simple storage crafting interface right on top of it to give us full GUI storage system support. It's a lot like the matter energy system that we're going for the goal of this video, so why not just settle with this? Well, it doesn't have auto crafting, and there's a lot of NBT issues with it, so it is a super temporary solution. But still, all the crafting trees that we're going to be subjected to later will be way easier to handle. And if you know Gregtech, you know that before we can make any LV machines, we need LV circuits, and they're a crafting tree all in themselves. Thankfully, the only ingredient that we're actually completely missing is sticky resin, but we can make an infinite amount of that really easily. Earlier, I'd made a coke oven multi-block to produce creosote that turns wood into treated wood, which we can use to make 2 large barrels. One of the barrels is going to hold mycelial seeds from dirt sieving and water to make infinite witch water, and the other will use that witch water and a Slotaki spore to duplicate the spores automatically. We can cook those to get slime, and cook slime to get sticky resin. Otherwise, we do need a lot of paper, and I only have like 5 sugarcane, but thankfully, there's a multi-block that can duplicate sugarcane completely for free, so paper is well within our grasp. But now the real work begins. LV circuits! Go! We have to craft resin boards and then turn them into printed boards with copper wire. We'll need glass tubes and steel bolts to make vacuum tubes and resistors, which require our sticky resin and paper with a mix of charcoal dust, and mashing all those bits together with our bare hands nets us 1 LV circuit. Yeah, not a lot, and we're gonna need way more than that, but these are expensive for us, especially the red alloy wires. The boards alone take 8 copper, and the glass tubes take enormous amounts of glass to produce in large quantities, but thankfully there will be LV machines that are gonna make these way easier to make. That being said, all of those machines require more than 1 circuit, so the first LV circuit grind begins. Plates, glass, resin, I'm crafting everything until we have a healthy nest egg of 10 circuits that we can use for machines to our heart's desires. And our heart desires electricity. Thankfully, this is where those beefy steam engines really come out to play, because we can use enormous amounts of RPM and stress units on a generator coil to create our first electricity production. I use our first circuit on a carbon brushes block that will connect to the generator coil. Then I need to surround them with special magnets, which are easy enough to make since they only take stone and magnetite dust, an ore that we have plenty of access to from gravel sieving. So super quickly, we have our first spot of Fe being generated. Fe is modded electricity, if you don't know. That being said, it's not a lot. Thankfully, making a new Create mod machine called an Energizer, we can charge diamonds and gold and use those with the basic magnets to turn them into fluxated magnets, which is 2 tiers above the regular ones we were just using, and it pushes our power gen well over 1000. But I was locked right in, so I grinded out 2 more coil setups, pushing our power generation to nearly 4000 Fe a tick. Thing is, Gregtech is too good for Fe-based power, so we have to make a converter in order to actually use it, which needs the first tier of superconductor wiring, soul-infused ingots, which is an alloy of soul sand and invar. Thankfully, we already have the means for invar since we have nickel dust from the ore factory, and iron is the only other ingredient. We can use the witch water from our Slotaki farm to make sand into soul sand, and then use a Create fan behind a soul fire to turn sand into soul sand for free. Soul steel ingots become a really easy craft, but sadly, their wiring is quite expensive. Remember, I still need to use 1 plate for 1 wire, and these guys don't work in the mechanical press, so it's 2 entire ingots for 1 single wire. But with our new converter in hand, we have access to a machine that'll cut the cost of wires by a factor of 4. First up, though, we need a few more components, including magnetic rods, and not wanting to waste redstone to actually magnetize them, I make our very first Gregtech machine. the polarizer. It'll magnetize my rods automatically. We can now make the first of the electric motors of the game, which are needed for the wire mill, a machine that can turn one ingot into 2 wires. An amazing upgrade. We can also make the first electric pistons to make a bender, which can finally make 1-to-1 sheets of all metals. No more 2 steel, 1 plate. Oh my god, we're free. But we're not done yet. We have a circuit nest egg and I'm gonna spend them. We craft the lathe for cheaper rods and even make it all the way to the LV assembler we needed. Yeah, we already have access to buckets of new recipes and tech tiers, including the coveted flint mesh. And with flint meshes in hand, the quest can begin for the most important multi-block in the entire game, the electric blast furnace. Oh, the EBF, the sweet muse of Gregtech. We need to advance into the MV tier of technology in order to unlock applied energistics. And like LV used steel, MV uses aluminum, a metal that's so unlike other girls, it requires the heat of an EBF with Copernical coils to smelt it. And if you don't like the way I pronounce Copernical, then please leave a detailed comment about how I am unintelligent below. If you're not familiar with the EBF, it's an upgradable multi-block that uses special heating coils in order to smelt resources. We're gonna need it for every metal in the game going forward, pretty much. Right now, the only coils we have access to is the Copernical coils, which is the lowest tier of heat and will require a huge amount of Copernical wire, bronze foil, and liquid tin alloy. As you might have guessed, we'll need to alloy copper and nickel to make Copernical. Although copper is plentiful, the ore factory doesn't make a load of nickel, but here's where those flint meshes I made earlier come into play. I can haunt cobblestone into blackstone, and then I make a new machine called a macerator that'll crush the blackstone into crushed blackstone, which we can sieve over the flint meshes and produce loads of nickel ore, which is gonna give us way more than we ever had access to. We'll need another new machine, the alloy smelter, to smelt the Copernical ingots, and we'll actually be turning those into 2 X wires instead of 1. I'll also get to use our new bender on bronze plates to turn them into bronze foil. The last thing we need is liquid tin alloy, which is a lot more of a pain to get. The actual ingot is easy to make, tin and iron in an alloy smelter, but melting it down is where it hurts. We need an extractor, which requires the dubious electric pump, a micro part that sends shivers down any Gregtech player's spine to make. I mean, just look at all the steps you have to do to make one of these by hand. It is such a pain. But our reward is a machine that can finally melt down ingots and blocks, including our tin alloy. With all the ingredients, we can now make the first of our coils inside of an assembler. Told you it was important. And we'll need to make 16 coils to support 1 EBF. While the coils craft, we still have to make heat-resistant Invar blocks, so it's time to bend, lathe, and wrench those Invar ingots into dozens of new shapes to make all the plating blocks we need. Most of the inputs and outputs we already have, but a noteworthy one is the energy port. We've gotten to the point where our multi-blocks now need electrical power to function, and I have to admit, I've kind of buried the lead on something. Aluminum requires MV power to be smelted, but we only have access to LV ports and converters, and to make the MV ones, we need aluminum anyways. So, are we stuck? Well, obviously not, the video hasn't ended. Multi-blocks are special in the fact that they can be overclocked. Having 2 ports of the same energy tier results in a power level 1 tier above them for an increased energy cost. So all I need are 2 LV ports and we'll be swimming in MV power. Finally, our first beautiful EBF can be instructed, full of NV power and beautiful coils. Though I feel like I'm kind of forgetting something. Oh right, I don't have any aluminum. So I sieve sand on flint meshes for raw sapphire ores that we can crush into dirty sapphire dust and clean inside of a cauldron. Then, by making an electrolyzer, we can separate the aluminum and oxygen just out of it, giving us access to a decent supply of aluminum and honestly a huge amount of oxygen, which we can use later for better steel production. But for now, we're popping the aluminum dust inside of the blast furnace and watching as it consumes just an insane amount of power and emits just a godly glow. The aluminum is gonna take a good while to smelt, so I take some time to make some high storage fluid cells from thermal in order to store ridiculous amounts of oxygen because we're gonna need the space. For a moment, it actually kind of seems like our goal was becoming close. I mean, we're on the barrier of medium voltage, and realistically, it was only a matter of time. And circuits. Yeah, applied energistics needs a huge amount of circuits to do anything meaningful since they're used in the storage cell crafting recipes. And we'll need MV circuits for a few required MV machines. And at this stage, 1 MV circuit needs 3 LV ones, a price that we cannot afford. But on the horizon of invention is a machine so powerful that it can reduce the crafts of circuits to remarkably low costs. And if we're truly going to get back to where we were in the last series, we have to get our hands on But first, we do actually have to get our hands on medium voltage circuits, which require new resources entirely, like gallium arsenide and new circuit boards. The gallium arsenide isn't hard at all. I make a centrifuge to extract arsenic dust from real gar, and a mixer to combine the arsenic with gallium that we got from the ore factory earlier. The circuit boards, however, are a bit more of a headache, as from now on we'll need special acids to complete each board, and first up on the acid train is sodium persulfate. Get ready for some realistic chemistry. The path to sodium persulfate has me crafting 4 chemical reactors and giving them their own power line, since they're going to be our first semi-automatic processing. We combine sulfur and oxygen to make sulfur dioxide, and then combine that with more oxygen to make sulfur trioxide. And what's better than sulfur trioxide? Wet sulfur trioxide, which is also known as sulfuric acid. Fun to play with, not to eat. We can now dunk some salt inside of our new sulfuric acid mixture to create sodium bisulfate dust, which is almost useful. It needs to be electrolyzed first to be turned into liquid sodium persulfate. And now that we have the acid we actually need the board to etch, which is also a really easy product. Just combining some wood pulp and glue in an assembler, and we are right there. Using some silver foil, the tasty sodium persulfate, and our new circuit boards, we can make our Tier 2 MV level circuit boards. Now with a dash of gallium arsenide, a pinch of copper wire, and a drop of liquid glass, we can make the diodes required for medium voltage circuits. So what are we actually going to do with our first MV circuits? Make an LV machine, of course. The circuit assembler is that godly powerful machine I talked about earlier, but because of its absolute insanity in the way that it can reduce costs for you, it actually costs circuits 1 tier above itself to craft. But it's so worth it. You see, each tier of technology have 3 tiers of circuits themselves. So at LV, there's 3 circuits. At MV, there's 3 circuits, and so on and so forth. Each tier of circuit is cheaper and more efficient than the last, but requiring higher tier machinery and crafting materials. And that's where the circuit assembler comes in. But that's only half the battle. We need to create actual circuit chips in order to get the Tier 2 LV and MV circuits. And that requires silicon boule processing, which is going to take us deep into the throes of medium voltage. The silicon boules, however, take actual real-life minutes to smelt, so I get those started immediately by making an arc smelter to smelt glass directly from sand using oxygen, crushing that in glass dust and centrifuging it into silicon dioxide dust, and then EBFing that with some gallium arsenide to create the boules. In order to process them into circuits, though, we'll need 2 machines, an MV laser engraver and an MV cutter, which is going to require us to progress so deep into medium voltage that you're going to forget what we're even doing. Our work is cut out for us. And so, the time for medium voltage arrives. In LV, the superconductor we used were easy to make soul steel, but MV asked for signalum, which is overall cheap to make, but requires absolutely ages in a blast furnace to smelt a single ingot. I got impatient while waiting and opted to just make a single amp MEV converter rather than a 4 amp one, which will bite me in the butt later, but it works for now to power an electrolyzer that I immediately make so that we can turn ruby dust into aluminum and chromium, which is an extremely important material for vanadium steel. If you've ever rushed applied logistics like myself, vanadium steel is going to send shivers down your spine. A material that is absolutely required to make an MV cutter, and as its own tech path to achieve. See, not only do we need chromium, but we need vanadium, which must be extracted from vanadium magnetite ore, a resource we could only extract through iron tier sieving. It's time to create the medium voltage assembler. And not only is it the upgraded tier of the LV assembler, so it's faster and unlocks new resources, but it actually has a secret use that makes it one of the best blocks in the entire pack. More on that later, though. Luckily, we have loads of aluminum, copper wires, and circuits, so the assembler actually comes in somewhat cheaply, and we begin to craft our new iron meshes. And that secret use? Well, obtaining the MV assembler unlocks the rocket boots in the shop, which once charged grant us full creative mode flight, which makes moving around our void world so much easier than before, and actually catches us up to our second to last episode of this pack. We really are approaching the final rush now. But back to vanadium steel land, we'll need an MV mixer, so I can make one that actually uses RPM and EU instead of just EU, which is actually cheaper to craft and a lot faster. It does kind of mean I have to route stress units around and make our MV line look a bit ugly, but it's a price I'm willing to pay. Now we can sieve gravel on top of iron meshes to get a hold of vanadium magnetite ore, which we can crush and then centrifuge to separate the vanadium dust. Combining that with chromium and steel dust in our new mixer to produce the vanadium steel compound we have finally been working towards. Naturally, this takes ages to smelt, so now, through the power of editing, the vanadium steel is already done, and we can finally make the buzzsaw needed for the advanced cutter. It needs a fluid to use inside of it, and we can make a distillery at LV to get distilled water, which runs a bit faster than regular water. Now finally, we can process down those silicon boules I crafted ages ago. We can now cut the silicon boules into silicon wafers, and then engrave those wafers with the laser engraver with different colored lenses to turn them into different circuit wafers. I've already grabbed a ruby lens earlier on in order to inscribe ILC wafers, and then the ILC wafers go back into the cutter to produce final IC chips. And with those integrated circuit chips, we can make the ultra cheap tier 2 LV and MV circuits that are absolutely going to supercharge the We are finally right on the horizon of applied energistics. We've progressed all the way into medium voltage, obtained creative flight, mastered the Create mod, and now have the cheapest low voltage and medium voltage circuits that we're going to have access to for a long time. But applied energistics is still locked behind a metal so elusive, we currently have no way of smelting it. Silicon. Silicon ingots require a Canthal tier blast furnace and have new and strange properties we haven't even encountered yet. But let's start with Canthal coils, the first step to silicon ingots. They need that chromium I was talking about earlier, and we're running low on that, but luckily I rubbed my last few functional brain cells together and remembered that I can actually use deployers to sieve for me and use item collectors to pick up all the loot. So getting a load more ruby ore was actually pretty convenient. We can now mix chromium, aluminum, and iron to create Canthal dust, which requires high voltage power to smelt. So it's time to use those new circuit wafers we've got in order to create 2 MV power hatches to overclock our EBFs to high voltage. And since we're now at that stage of the game where we're gonna need more and more and more and more ingots, which take longer and longer and longer to smelt, I make another electric blast furnace. Unfortunately, we lack sufficient power to run 2 high voltage EBFs at once, so it's time to give our power supply a big boost. In order to upgrade our magnets though, we're gonna need a higher tier of ore factory, the electrokinetic ore factory. The EKOF is a steel behemoth, and it takes nearly 200 ingots of the stuff. Luckily, we can make steel on the EBF with wrought iron and oxygen way faster than the primitive blast furnace, and I am not gonna make you watch me craft the frankly excessive amounts of decorative and functional blocks we need, so hey, look at that! As expensive as it was, we have ourselves a fully functioning electrokinetic ore factory, complete with distilled water, power inputs, and Create mod RPM! This is a massive upgrade, having the time it takes to process all the ores that we can, and unlocking entirely new processing lines. Most importantly, we now have access to neodymium, which is probably the slowest resource I have to produce, since it takes multiple machines of processing, and all of them just take forever. So in the meantime, I sieve down dust on flint meshes for skystone dust in order to create an alloy that we'll need for applied energistics called star steel. Still, after an extremely long time, like long enough that I made 2 more steam engines for fun, we have enough neodymium to make a full 12 neodymium magnet array to upgrade our power supply. We drastically increase our stress unit requirements, but also push our FE production efficiency to 90%. And plugging it into our EBFs, it's not enough power? At least I thought it wasn't enough power. Actually, I didn't have enough amperage, which is a part of the realistic energy system that Gregtech adds, and I don't have time to explain realistic electricity to you, so here's the entire Wikipedia page for an amperage. I hope that helps. But basically, I just made more converters and it made my EBFs work, which gives us all the speed and all the power that we need to smelt those Canthal ingots. However, when Canthal is smelted in an EBF, it comes out blazing red hot and completely unusable, so I have to burn my blocky little hands as I rush the half-molten ingots into a chemical bath that'll cool them down into usable materials. Side note, this makes smelting Canthal take even longer. The actual coil making process, though, isn't really bad, and I end up just going the full mile to make all the coils needed to upgrade both of our EBFs for convenience sake. With Canthal coils within our grubby little hands, we have the power to melt down silicon. Now, smelting silicon dust directly takes years, but there's an alternative method that has us smelting silicon dioxide dust, which we get from glass processing, and carbon dust, which we get from diamond electrolysis, and that smelts into silicon ingots considerably faster. Much like the required coil, silicon ingots come out red hot, so just know that for every ingot I use, I have to dump it in this stupid chemical bath that takes way too long. But finally, with silicon ingots in hand, we have progressed far enough into Gregtech to have access to all the machines we'll need to create applied energistics. Time to create these circuit presses. Inside of a forming press, I can combine the star steel I made earlier with gold, silicon, diamond, and sorta quartz crystals to make various applied energistics circuit presses. To actually use the circuit presses, though, we'll need to use an alloy smelter, and since there are 4 of them, I craft up 3 more alloy smelters so we can run all 4 of them at once, and I decided on making a stack of each of the raw circuits. If you know applied energistics, then you'll know we're going to need oogles and boogles more silicon circuits than any of the other ones, since to turn a raw circuit into a proper circuit, we need to combine one with a silicon circuit. So if you thought I was free from silicon processing, ha! Never! After some time, though, we have every type of applied energistics circuit at our disposal, and now we can begin to create the ME system that we have been dreaming about for so long. We create fluix crystals to mill into fluix cables and create an energy acceptor, a block that converts FE into AE power, and begin using our new circuits to create a terminal to access items and a disk drive to store them in. And also, don't tell anybody, but I do disable the AE channels because I absolutely hate that feature with all of my heart. With cables, an acceptor, a disk drive, and gameplay mechanics turned off, we finally have the bones of an ME system set up. All we need is the item cells used to digitally store our many things. And since we have so much access to easy circuits, I am able to make a ton of 1K, 4K, and even 16K storage parts, slotting them into cheap cell housings. With one fell swoop of an axe, I can pop our colossal chest like a piñata and use a magnet to drag all the items towards our new super small on the outside, large on the inside item storage system. From nothing more than a tree on some dirt, we have achieved the pinnacle technology of item management and storage. So thanks for making it this far in the video. And if you're ready for the return of star technology, you know what to do. We're back, baby.